I am a reluctant artist. I don't think artist it describes exactly what I do. I edit the Mail and Guardian's arts and culture section, like as my 9 to 5. But I have a background in across the arts in South Africa. I've done fashion, I've done music, I've done art, and now I'm starting to kind of feel my way through film. I've been making a documentary for the past 4 years. So from 9 to 5, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I work at the Mail and Guardian, and I'm in a position of responding to the arts, constantly curating people's work and words on what the contemporary art scene looks like in South Africa and the continent. I've been doing that for almost 3 years, and at night and on weekends, I'm making a documentary. And this is where the two worlds meet. So the probing that I'd like to make today is because I work in the art space, but not as I write as well, but I don't produce art in the way that many people do here. What role is art playing in the pursuit of historical justice? Obviously, having been born in a country like South Africa, segregation is something that I know very well. And living in the aftermath of apartheid, slavery, colonialism, we're constantly living in a post-apartheid condition. My work is about unpacking that condition, but I look at it from a female perspective or a woman's perspective, and somebody who didn't necessarily experience apartheid on a day-to-day basis because I was born in 1985 when it was coming to an end. I just want to put a few statements out there and come up with responses to them. So this idea of justice is my first concern. What is justice? What does justice for apartheid look like? What does justice for colonialism, for slavery look like? And whenever I have a conversation with people about this, it seems that it's something we can't really describe or term because I don't believe there is justice for apartheid or colonialism. I don't think that you can unrape people. I don't think that you can disseminate the land as easily as it seems maybe on paper. So my premise is that there is no such thing as justice. There's not enough money you can give back. There's not enough families you can unbreak. And so we have to reimagine this idea of what justice means because it's not in the formation that we imagine it. In fact, actually, I want to open up to the table for people to give maybe what are their examples of what they think justice is for something like, because we're all living in a post-colonial, post-apartheid situation in our various countries, and what formulations or permutations of justice can they be? If anyone wants to, yes.
Well, when I pick up from that, how I got noticed, is that on one hand, there's the questioning of what is justice, then there's what society globally kind of has us believe that punishment is justice, and so as people are punished, we kind of feel better, or we appreciate being soothed, or betterment of self, as long as someone is being punished for something that might have wrong. So I guess does that help?
Yeah, I mean, it's a response. I've thought about it, and I've not landed at a place where I'll feel like I'm less hurt if somebody is in jail. I think that the biggest crime of apartheid, slavery, and colonialism was this idea of segregation and separating us from knowing each other. The point is that we were actively, intentionally stopped from knowing each other, and in the post-apartheid condition, so the film that I'm making, the short answer is it's about unrequited grace. The fact that black people in South Africa for the past 400 years have made intentional and forced moves to engage in white spaces, to know white people intimately, from black women washing white people's panties, to black men tending their gardens, to black people raising and having to learn the language and cultures and constructions of reality that Europeans created, and it has not been reciprocated. So when 1994 happened and the whole reconciliation and Rainbow Nation project was constructed, it came from the perspective of, we are going to put a hand out and say, let us rather forgive. That forgiveness wasn't necessarily something that was sanctioned by everybody. It kind of happened to us. And people are now in a position where we're saying we've been waving for 20 years, and largely there has not been a response from the other side in terms of knowing the culture, knowing languages, eating the food. I know what the food at my friend Samantha's house tastes like. I can walk into her fridge and I know that there's brie cheese or camembert, and I know the taste of it. I know the cured meats. I've drink champagne. My friends get married at wine farms in Cape Town, and they wear white dresses, and they throw the bouquet at their weddings. And this knowing is not reciprocated by the other side. And so my work sits inside that tension, inside the domestic space. The response is feminine, and it's about what happened when the law changed to the people of the country. How did they get to know each other? What happened inside classrooms? And I look at my own, so this work is it's like a presentation of the intervention that art can make in the current situation that we're in. So I'm looking at the domestic space, looking at a feminine space, which is where a feminine response, which is where the domestic side is a historically feminine space, and I'm trying to create a work that can ask questions and seek answers from there. And currently, where I am 4 years later into it, I'm into this idea of confronting my enemy and trying to know my enemy, and having my enemy trying to know me as a form of justice. For me, justice is being known. It's being seen. It's something that has been denied to us for many, many years in South Africa. And the art that I'm trying to create, and the art that I curate in the newspaper space on a weekly basis, argues for this case of being seen. The other thing is how I enter South Africa and apartheid is from the perspective of somebody who grew up in a homeland. So I did not grow up in a township like Soweto or Khayelitsha or Mdantsane in urban South Africa. I grew up in an illegitimate country that supported the notion of apartheid, but supposedly to the benefit of Xhosa people. And a lot of the times when we talk about the history of South Africa, the history of places like the Transkei and Bophuthatswana are completely erased. And what happened in those is kind of sidelined, and people who grew up in there are kind of seen as people who are complicit, because I did not suffer the real consequences of apartheid like my friends who grew up in Soweto and Umlazi were suffering. Because of this illegitimate relationship between the apartheid government and the leaders of the Transkei, this collaboration, while it was illegitimate politically, for the people growing up inside, I was 100% sheltered from apartheid as a child. So my film is also a child's response to South Africa's history. So I was sheltered, and in that sheltering, I had 8 or 9 years of having a chance to become a person, umtu, in Xhosa, which actually the translation of a person is not sufficient. Umtu is part of isintu, which is the practice of ubuntu. My work is also trying to unpack what is this Ntu thing, where does it come from, how old is it? It comes from, just listening to your talk, my people, when I do the history, 800 years come back from Burundi. So my family tree, I can link it back to Burundi through the clan names. And so my response is also from that perspective of, hey, wait a minute, for the past maybe 5-6 years, I have taken on a history that's not mine because I'm black, because I thought my identity was black. But I only became black in 1994, when I learned about apartheid, which was after the Transkei and places like that were dissolved. So I grow up as Umtu, around Africans and Xhosa people, where there's no, white people were there, but they were not white like they were in South Africa, and I don't remember seeing them. My family can tell me that they were there, but I don't remember seeing them. Everything around me was Xhosa, and the world revolved around being a young Xhosa person. And so when we'd watch television and like the Cosby Show on Bob TV, they were Xhosa to me. They weren't Americans. They were just Xhosas who lived overseas and they spoke another language, because that's how rooted I was in my world. The encounter of then becoming black comes in '94 when I go into the white spaces, where then someone said, hey, you're black. And then I formed my identity around what this person told me, I'm black. And there was always a tension between us kids who came from the Transkei and the Xhosa kids who lived in Mdantsane and Duncan Village, which were the townships of East London, in that when I met other races, it wasn't from this raised fist perspective. It wasn't from a perspective of they're your enemies. It was from an interest, like, oh shit, people have this weird hair. What's up with this hair? What's up with why do you talk like that? Why does your food taste like that? So I came at it from a place of naivety and innocence that kids like me who were growing up in Soweto didn't experience, because they had seen the interaction of white and black from a different perspective. And so my work tries to also look at this from the perspective, because I have not found solace in locating myself in blackness completely. And in the work that I do in the Mail and Guardian, on one hand, because I live in Johannesburg now and I deal with different languages, different cultures. Before, I used to be a freelancer for 8 years, and I would work by myself at home. And I could write about race politics, gender politics, from a perspective of never, ever having to encounter white men, ever, in my everyday basis. And then now I moved to an office where I am now intimately involved with Indians, coloreds, blacks, whites, of different races on a daily basis. And so my politics, I've learned, do not serve me on an intimate, everyday basis. I'm now forced to, the guy who does the layout in the newspaper is somebody who has the complete opposite politics to me, and he hates me. He legitimately hates me. On a daily basis, I have to deal with somebody who thinks I'm a piece of shit from 9 to 5. And I've had to learn how to monitor my responses. There have been times when I've been super angry about it. There have been times when I've been, let's try rub his back. And eventually it all led to a situation where we had a big confrontation, and he told me I make him feel obsolete. And my Isintu teaching from my background said, shit, this is another human being, and I need to treat him in a good way. But my black politics, which I learned later in life, was saying that, well, that's the point right now. It's like, I mean, your time is finished, and you know. And so there's these constant collisions between blackness and Isintu and Ubuntu, and my work is about merging those two and trying to recover and remake myself as a product of both, not just a product of blackness and a product of Ubuntu and Isintu. And what I try to do is merge those things and share them with the world. And so the question then, I don't have an answer for the question that I've put here, by the way. It's just, how can our art speak to, right now in a moment where we're trying to figure out what is justice and we're trying to heal, are we trying to heal? We talk about healing, but what modalities are we using to heal as people who are all in a global post-colonial context? Personally, and the work that I'm trying to communicate, this week's edition of the Mail and Guardian, it's got Uriel's work, quite largely featured, because I found your exhibition quite interesting, looking at these ideas of indigenous knowledge systems versus Western knowledge systems, and which knowledge systems do we still function on versus which ones are being silenced. And again, because I come from a background where it was homogenous largely, and imiti and isintu and ukfuta, and that stuff was very, very normal to me. It wasn't, no one said it's evil or bad. And so your work is an example of how I feel. I mean, the work and your collaborations, I mean, I asked the person who wrote the story, why is this guy coming from Switzerland coming to tell us these things? What is his positionality in this question? And I was quite defensive, because I was like, this is our stuff as indigenous Africans, and why is the intervention being brought out by a Swiss artist? But the more I read the work, the more I was like, okay, I do understand that. Again, the answers don't lie in what apartheid tried to create, which is separation and division. They come from these dialogic spaces where the idea is to encounter each other first, have the crashes and the collisions, and at the end of the day, figure out how to have a conversation across spaces where people don't know each other. The other thing I also want to add is this idea of making multiple narratives of the experiences of colonialism and slavery and apartheid. I used to think that, yes, it's enough for me to just contain myself in blackness, but now I realize, oh, my friend, grew up in Soweto. She had a very different experience than someone like me. And it's important that these different experiences of blackness meet to also complicate existing narratives about who we are, so that we can kind of get to the point of knowing each other. I'm really interested in being known and being seen, and knowing and seeing the other person in ways that haven't happened before. And so I think the work that I do and the art that I support and that I'm always working to propel and to be seen out there is art that does that helps people know each other beyond the naming, beyond the saying, this is what happened. We are in that moment, and that's necessary, but what happens after this moment that we're in right now? Yeah.
Can I jump in and just say something? You said that justice is about knowing.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely, I think you're completely right. But there's sort of a historic background where precisely knowing is what needs to not happen. So, for example, in the early 70s, when Credo Mutwa wrote his first book, Indaba My Child, there was a huge big outburst because he was giving access of indigenous knowledge, which was the only protection. They don't know about us, so they cannot harm us.
Yeah.
And this kind of shielding ourselves from the spaces which have always been spaces of either colonialism, apartheid, or you name it, in the past century at least, this shielding ourselves from transmitting the knowledge or the knowledge being accessible has been part of the cycle of
abuse.
Our own children not having access to it, because then we put them in schools where they get their knowledge and not ours.
100%. I think about this question all the time. There's a difference between studying and knowing. Studying is the outside stuff. It's the stuff where Credo Mutwa writes a book, somebody picks it up, there's no context. He walks in there, he reads the book, he is not knowing intimately. I'm talking about me and you sitting across each other and talking it to each other. Not the knowledge that has been produced in the academy, which has been, let us study Africans, let us study the other, and still not know them. So in South Africa, whites have been studying us for 400 years, and they still don't know how to greet us. They don't know that our greeting, when you say sawubona, you're not saying hi. Hi doesn't pivot around any ideology. It's just a word that denotes I'm here, hi. Sawubona means I see you. Just like when you say dumela in Sesotho or Setswana, you say, agree that you see me, and the person responds, ahe, I see you. That handshake or that acknowledgement is the seeing that I'm talking about. Because once you say you see me, you're then saying, I acknowledge your humanity, and there's a cosmic contract that's signed between me and you that says, I'm not going to hurt you, and you're not going to hurt me. Whereas the other one doesn't have any ideological principles that it pivots around. And so I'm not necessarily talking about knowledge in the academy sense or knowledge that can be gathered by anyone out of context. I'm talking about us being inside intimate spaces where the law is not looking, where you can't theorize emotion, where it's just me and you getting to know each other, and not only as a way to undo what apartheid set out to do, which was to segregate and separate it and show that I don't know what's going on at your house and you don't know what's going on at my house, but as a way to heal this ignorance, because we're all suffering from ignorance. I wrote a list of things down that I think collectively they cut across race, class, gender, and they go at, and I'm not a humanist. Please don't anyone think I'm not a humanist. There's a difference. I mean, I'm somebody who's trying to critically read Ubuntu and understand what Ubuntu is. Not Ubuntu in the 1990s sense that was bastardized by the Rainbow Nation Project. I'm talking about Ubuntu as a way to and Isintu as a way to respond to the myriad pathologies that African people face. Also saying that the healing is going to come from blackness and Africanness because we know the full gamut of things. And I'm trying to say Ubuntu and must be or can be put in the same category as Buddhism, for instance, as a knowledge system that has its own laws and ways of and how to understand reality. So I can't find this list now. Here it is. The things that we're dealing with that are denying us from knowing each other, but that of the very reason of why we should know each other. in South Africa and in the world, but I'm looking at South Africa. Unfinished hurt, unrequited love and grace, misunderstanding, ignorance, a lingering segregation and a distance, a fear of being vulnerable, a trust deficit, we don't trust each other, a fear of being irrelevant, anger, denial, historical forgetting, rejection, the fear of not belonging, the fear of being unlovable and worthy of love, abandonment issues, deep loneliness, being easily offended, and offending others easily or being rough and cruel with others, greed, scarcity syndrome, unmet expectations, daddy issues, faithlessness, we do not know each other, we miss each other, feeling isolated from the next person.
5 minutes, yeah?
5 minutes. And so, entitlement. Across all, you can group it, but when I've been reading this thing for like 4 years. I've actively been looking at this idea of who are these white people and who are these black people, and why are we together? Why? Personally, I've also looked. It's led me to a point where I'm like, why did I incarnate in this body at this time in this country? I could have been from Japan, or Fiji, or somewhere where everyone is like the same race, but I came here at a particular time, and so what is my role? And then I chose this name, which my parents made up when I was like 4 or 5 days old, which means be the love where there is none. And so I'm like, what does this all mean? And how do I carry this into my everyday, into the work that I do in a political newspaper where if I say the word love, people laugh at me as the crazy arty, the arts corner, the arts editor people. They're more concerned with the public politics, with the politics with the capital P, with the corruption and the Zoomers, and this person has done this. And I'm saying, but how are we going to talk about rape beyond just the statistics and this happened? And how, if we're throwing stones at the government constantly, and that's our MO, which is to seek corruption in the government and seek corruption. And I say to the people I work with, if you look at the last 5 years of the cover of the Mail and Guardian, it's got middle-aged black people and white men and women, and they're corrupt. What picture are we painting about this particular sect of people? And how do we change that narrative? Yes, corruption is a huge concern, but we also have anxiety and depression in this office, in amongst all of us. How are we helping people? Every week I'm like, okay guys, I understand that we have to make this paper, we're all in a cycle, but how are we helping people? So I know that it seems like a very naive question in like the times we're living in, but that is why I do what I do. And what I'm trying to do is, how do I make something on a weekly basis that is helping somebody either shift their perspective or become more angry or think about something? And I can't tell the story or respond from a perspective that's not mine. So in the work also, I do the thing of always placing myself at the center, because I'm like, well, I don't know another perspective. And I think this other perspective of being a woman, of being black, of not growing up in South Africa proper in the way that I did, is also an important intervention that needs to happen in a space where we are very comfortable in living in binaries. We're very okay with re-stratifying ourselves according to the modalities that apartheid formed us in as a form of response, which I get it, but it's ironic in that it's not helping us. Has it helped us become better and nicer to each other? Are our relationships better? Are we having better sex? Are we more connected? Do we look each other in the eye? And when I read the situation, no. It's not like that. So how can we make art that speaks to that, like that goes beyond that goes inside, not necessarily, that's not only concerned with the outside politics, that's always also looking at the inside and fighting for the inside, to not be naive and feminine and like this esoteric self-helpy corridor in knowledge, but to actually, because all of us have a similar inside. Yeah, I think that's it.